Order, and the clerk will call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Miller.
Here.
Ms. Conwell. Here. Ms. Galucci. Ms. Galucci is absent.
Kelly Britt here for Ms. Galucci.
Mr. Feliciano.
Present.
Ms. Kilbane. Mr. Singh.
Present.
Mr. Osby. Osby is absent at the moment. Mr. Mitterholzer. Mr. Mitterholzer is absent at the moment. There is a quorum.
Okay. Thank you very much. Do we have anybody signed in for public comment related to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Calabrese.
Okay. We thank you very much for being here at the meeting this morning, and welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you. Just a few comments. First of all, I want to thank you, Dale, and the county for doing this, and it's really a great forum for the importance of public transit. I want to thank Representative Greenspan, my representative in Columbus, for his strong support. We were down in Columbus a few weeks ago, met with David, and he certainly understands what we do. Really just want to talk briefly about funding. This has been a very positive week for RTA in a number of areas. We are in search of the Malcolm Baldrige Award, which is a very prestigious award for public sector. We received word this week that we made the gold level in that quest, which is really positive. We were recognized at a national level for both our bus safety program and our industrial safety program. We launched our real-time app this week, which was a conversation that we had here in this room a couple of times related to your committee. And this morning, we had a little press event announcing that we're extending our trolley service, downtown trolley service down to the Flats East Bank, beginning on May 26th. Really important. You know, why are we doing that? We're doing that because nationally 87% of the trips on public transit are to take people to make money or spend money. And we hope they do both down to Flats, which is good certainly for our local economy. I think we all understand that to have a world-class city, you must have a world-class public transportation system. We were here last month, and Carol Caruso talked to us about the importance of job access and the mismatch between our jobs and the economy. You know, we obviously are doing as much on that issue as we can. One of the main criteria there, and working with the county and working with the city, so the economic development departments, is how best to locate those jobs in areas we can best serve. I was in Washington last week talking about the federal budget. I heard a great quote that I want to impart here. As we all, and Carol said last week, everyone's important. We're really trying to recruit the millennials to our area and to retain them and to recruit them in our area. And the mayor of Indianapolis said, trying to sell millennials on locating in your city without a viable public transportation system is trying to sell millennials a cell phone without a camera. So it's very, very difficult, important to be there. I was really pleased that on a federal level, you know, the president has hinted about eliminating the federal transit program. The bill that was passed last Friday, probably not because I was there last Wednesday and Thursday, at least allocated the approved level of funding for public transit through the end of the federal fiscal year. It was a very bipartisan vote, 359 to 65 in the House and 83 to 16 in the Senate. So again, it's one of those bipartisan issues that we hope we can see more of at a state level. I know we're working very closely with the County Commissioners Association on the MCO sales tax issue. There are two proposals they are supporting. One would be a permanent fix to the MCO issue by adding that sales tax to non-Medicaid health care. And the second is to do some kind of a hold harmless, not for a year or 5 quarters, but for several years until we can further debate how best to address this for the sake of the counties and the public transit systems in Ohio. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the April 6, 2017 meeting. They're in the packet. Do we have a motion relative to those? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, been moved and seconded to approve the minutes from April 6th. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. Ayes have it, and the minutes are approved. No matters have been referred to the committee. Before we get into our discussion, a couple of announcements. First of all, we've learned that a distinguished member of our committee, Claire Kilbane, is going to retire at the end of this month, and we would like to thank Ms. Kilbane for her distinguished service and regular participation and thoughtful comments, and just you've done a wonderful job on this committee, and we appreciate the wealth of transportation and planning knowledge that you brought to this committee. We're most appreciative for the time and energy that you spent on our behalf.
Thank you.
I'm also pleased to announce that Director Glenn Coyne has nominated Marionette Richardson Scott from the County Planning Department to succeed Claire, and Ms. Richardson Scott is here today, and we thank you for your willingness to serve on this committee. Thank you.
Chair, I'd like to say that Marionette has a lot of experience. Her and I both worked on senior transportation and welfare to work. That Marionette has a wealth of information. She's worked on welfare to work, transportation, senior transportation. She's working on master plans and has been to NOACA. So she's well-versed in transportation issues, and it's, I guess, a passion of both her and I that we both share. So.
We welcome you to the committee and look forward to your working with us for the remainder of the year. Thank you. I would also like to point out that our distinguished colleague, one of our two new members of County Council, Nan Baker, is with us today for the meeting. Thank you for joining us. Okay. Now we're going to go on to our main event for the day, which is that State Representative David Greenspan, who is one of the 11 charter members of the Cuyahoga County Council under the new government, served the initial 6 years of the county government. He initially served as the chairperson of the committee, the operations committee that handled ethics reform, among other things, and he oversaw creating the strongest local ethics legislation at the county level in the state of Ohio, and also passed legislation to create the Inspector General's office, and then for the last 2 terms, 2 years, he served as the chairperson of the Finance and Budget Committee, oversaw the passage of the 2016-2017 biennial budget, and this was a budget in which the executive and the administration were initially pretty far apart in their approaches, and then Councilman Greenspan had to bring everybody together and get us to work together, and we found common ground where both sides got most of what they wanted. So it was quite an accomplishment. Councilman Greenspan then ran for state representative when Ms. Baker was term limited, and won that election, and has participated in the state's biennial budget process, and now is going to give us a report on what the budget bill looks like as it passed out of the House and went on to the Senate, particularly on our transportation issues. Representative Greenspan.
The only other time I've been in this room is for executive session. We weren't allowed to do any of that. So I appreciate the chairman's invitation for me to come here, and I know we've had some scheduling conflicts, but I'm glad that we're all here today. I want to go over just kind of, I know I keep calling her representative because she was my representative, so understands the process of how the budget process in Columbus works. It's a little different than here, and the calendars are a little different. So the governor prepares a budget, submits it to the House of Representatives at around the end of January. We got it a few days before the end of the month. The House then amends the budget, reviews and amends the budget, and submits its budget to the Senate, which we did about a week and a half ago. The Senate then has until the end of June. We're hearing around June 18th or so is about when we'll get the budget back from the Senate. We will then go into conference and come out with a budget that will address the differences between the House version and the Senate version. Then we will both bodies will then pass out a budget for the governor. The governor at that point can only cannot add to the budget. He can only approve and veto line item veto items in the budget. That's kind of a top level version of the operating budget. The transportation budget was on a faster track, and that budget we passed out in March. And I could talk about that. Obviously, that's an issue here, but I wanted to at least let everybody know the two main budgets that have been before us right now. I put together, and each of you has a package with some items that we can talk about, or you can review at your leisure. The first item is the amended substitute budget. That is the budget that the House is working with. These are the primary talking points that are in the budget that the House amended and sent over to the Senate. And it covers a bunch of different areas. So I've presented that to you, and you have that to review. The second item is the comparison document for House Bill 26. So I mentioned to you the different phases of how the bills are presented, the governor, then the House, then the Senate. And what is compiled is this comparison document. And just for the sake of looking at the first page, not necessarily looking at what the items are in the first page, you'll see three columns: the executive, as passed by the House, and as passed by the Senate. So this shows you, if you were to look at this at a glance, at this specific budget item, as it was introduced, if the House made any amendments to it, and or if the Senate made any amendments to the House or the governor's version, or the House version. So this is a document that specifically relates to transportation, which is obviously of interest to this committee. The next document you have, and this is just a Gongwer summary of the major items, and I say major, most items that were adopted in not only House Bill 49, which is the state budget, the operating budget, but also in the omnibus budget. So I left this, I didn't include this. So the House goes through and prepares its budget, votes a substitute budget out, and then there's about a week or so at which time the House members can submit additional amendments or resubmit amendments that they originally submitted that weren't included. That's referred to as the omnibus budget. So these two documents here refer to that you have referred to the same bill, House Bill 49, but one has to do with the original amendments and one deals with omnibus amendments. So just to give you a glance of the items in the operating budget, there were about 2,600 amendments offered, and these are the ones that were accepted. There were some amendments that were accepted in the sub-bill, the substitute bill, that were removed in the omnibus budget. And those items are all listed here, but I gave you those two documents as well. A little further detailed information, which you may not be interested in, but I at least provided it. The next document, which is a memorandum from me to the Finance Chair, represents the amendments that I submitted to the substitute House bill. Some of them were accepted, I would say about half. whether accepted directly as a result of an amendment that I made or in conjunction with other members who submitted similar bills or.
That's an awfully high percentage for a freshman.
I do what I do. The next few documents are transportation related, but specifically to Council District 1 and House District 16, which are identical. These are summary documents of transportation projects occurring in the 5 West Shore communities. The next document is a summary of requests made by the 5 mayors of the cities that I took to ODOT to see if we're able to get these projects moving along, and you have that as well. With that, and the last attachments are actually the actual budget amendments that I submitted for transportation in that relate to House District 16 or Council District 1. These were not accepted in the transportation budget. These are more capital budget related items. And once we sit down with ODOT, we'll be able to navigate through which items to submit for the capital budget later this year. But I wanted to give you at least an overview of the information you have in front of you. Now, as far as the budget is concerned, let's start with the revenue side of the budget. There are a couple of challenges that we have as it relates to the revenue and the budget. First of all, we'll talk about, and it was mentioned regarding the MCO funding reduction. And that obviously has a direct impact on counties and as it is now, counties and transit authorities throughout the state. In this round, in our budget that we submitted in working with the County Commissioners Association, we were unable to come up with a consistent plan during this time. The County Commissioners Association, and because we're working closely with them, has retained a consultant who we're working with, and it was uncertain at the time that we were going to have to pass the budget out, the exact direction that we were looking at going. So we are now working with the Senate on identifying this issue. The one of the 2 plans that Joe mentioned has to do with extending the current protocol that the governor in his budget has proposed in order to fill the state's gap. The state's gap due to the MCO reduction is about $600 million. The counties and transit is about $200 million. And that would have been the logical explanation or logical solution, is to go ahead and expand, go from 600 to 800 and cover everybody. And that's still on the table. The challenge with that is we would have to go to the federal government to get a waiver, to get an exemption in order for that to happen. So it's not off the table, but it's not as easy as the legislature just unilaterally making a decision to do this. We would require some federal assistance. And some of the other concepts, there were 4 I know that we were discussing. I'm not on the Finance Committee, so I wasn't privy to exactly what those 4 proposals were. But obviously, in conjunction with the CCAO, the decision was made to not put a proposal in the House version of the budget, but to work with the Senate and come out with a plan collectively that during conference we would be able to identify, which will be a very short window, about we're hoping the last 10 days of June. So just to give you an idea where that is, it somewhat leaves counties right now and transits they're covered in the short term, but they're not covered in the long term. And they're not covered in their entirety in both periods, but we're working towards that, and it's clearly on everyone's mind. One of the areas that I'm focusing on specifically as it relates to transit and trying to explain the value of transit, especially not only in our state, but especially in urban communities, especially in Cuyahoga County, is not only the urban core mobility concerns, but also the issues as it relates to delivery of health care and how a number of consumers of public transit use that as their primary source for health care. So that's obviously one issue that I'm focused on. The other issue I'm focusing on is obviously economic development. And that's a great analogy that the mayor of Indianapolis outlined as Councilmember Baker can attest. We've seen tremendous growth in Westlake in particular as it relates to American Greetings and Highland Software. And a number of the employees that work there live in downtown, and they would rather take transit to and from public transit to and from their homes. But there's some challenges with doing that, and obviously cuts to transit funding would further hamper that ability. And I'm emphasizing and putting a stronger lean on the economic development side of the issue. And as Councilman Miller or Baker can attest, in Columbus, there is a divide between urban and rural. And so trying to explain the vast needs of an urban community and balancing those with the challenges in the more rural communities as it relates to public transit is somewhat problematic, or at least causes opportunity for additional discussion. So we're working hard on that, and not only myself, but I know that Representative Sweeney and Barnes and Patman and House and Boyd and Antonio and Yowski and Patton, we're all working, at least on the House side, and have recognized this. And I know in talking with Senator Dolan in particular, that he's aware of the challenges, and I know, I'm sure that you've had extensive conversations with him. We are working on this. This is not an issue that is falling off the radar screen, not only from a continuation of existing funding, but also looking at the importance of transit as it relates to delivery of many services and many opportunities throughout all the communities in Ohio. So I know that that's a big concern, and I know when I was on council, county council, this was an emphasis, and we recognize it. The challenge is, as I said, the MCO reduction in funding is a major issue, and then the state in itself is looking at about a $400 million per year, so $800 million over this next biennial reduction in revenue to the state. And how is it that we're dealing with that? And it's an interesting discussion as to what's causing the reduction. We're not seeing necessarily a decline in business activity. We're not necessarily seeing a decline in sales tax. The state is still meeting it is still year over year stronger in revenue. It's just not meeting the projections that were anticipated. So that's obviously an issue we're working on. There's some discussion that the reduction of the shift from the in the income tax to provide the first $250,000 of small business income be exempt from income tax. There are some discussions that part of the reduction in state income has to do with the shift of small C corporations going to the LLC S corporation tax structure in order to pay less taxes, which was the intent of the bill and intent of the legislation. The shift may have been greater than was originally anticipated, and I believe the original intent was to encourage new businesses to come to Ohio, which we're seeing, but we're also seeing a number of C corporations restructure themselves to be LLCs or S corporation pass-throughs to take advantage of the first $250,000 in taxes being exempt from income tax. So we're looking at what's driving that, but those are some of the revenue challenges we're dealing with. And obviously, as a state, and talking more on the general fund side, the challenges dealing with this opioid and addiction issue aren't going away, and those demands are becoming much more great on how we deliver services. And one thing that the House did, and I'm glad it was reported widely, is the House has, and the Speaker was very clear when we opened the session, that the House would focus and create a HOPES task force. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's Heroin Opioid Prevention, Education, and Safety Task Force, which will be impaneled this summer. But to further that in the budget, the House appropriated $170 million to deal with this, to support the HOPES task force initiative, and it covers. To use the word all is often you open yourself up, but it's believed it will address most of the major areas in dealing with this heroin and addiction issue, from education and prevention, but also treatment. There was $20 million put in to build facilities for additional beds, which we recognize the need for beds is an issue. So just want to give you a little bit of a scope.
On that point, I'll just break in for a moment and bring to everybody's attention that also the city of Lakewood in my district received a federal grant to put together a comprehensive program on the opioid crisis, and they're going to basically throw everything they've got at it, do a lot of evaluation, and try to come up with a model that can be demonstrated and that can be replicated and scaled. So that's another important initiative in that area.
Well, and it's important. I mean, look, that in my opinion, that the drug and addiction issue is the largest single issue that not only Ohio but we're dealing with as a nation. And whether we're looking at economic development opportunities, it becomes almost irrelevant if the employers can't find employees that can pass a drug test. So if you look at it from the economic development front, it's clearly critical that we address this issue. But there are some health and human service issues, whether it's kinship care, and there's additional money for kinship care put into this. Foster care is becoming increasingly in demand. In your large counties, whether you're talking about the 3 Cs, in Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati, and Franklin, Hamilton, and Cuyahoga, as it relates to this issue, we have an infrastructure that's already in place for foster care. But some of our smaller communities, some of our smaller counties don't deal with this issue on a wide-scale basis like we do. They're struggling as we are, but struggling even harder to find foster families. And this heroin issue, as an example, in that area, is placing children out of their families as their parents are seeking treatment, or unfortunately if they pass away and there's no next of kin to take care of them, placing a greater demand on our foster care system throughout the state. So the intent of the HOPES program and the $170 million that was appropriated over the 2-year period is intended to address a lot of these issues across many different fronts. So that was a major initiative in the general fund budget. But I digress because I know some of your concerns, and we're here to talk primarily about transportation, but I wanted to give you kind of just an overview as to what we've been looking at in some at least one key initiative. There was one thing in the transportation budget that was adopted, which has to do with, which will help, my estimate, it'll bring about $2 million a year into Cuyahoga County, which council would vote on as a permissive $5 license plate fee to be used solely for infrastructure. So that is included in the House version of the budget. I don't know where the Senate, what the Senate will do with it, but it did move out of the House and is into the Senate at this point. So that's, once again, permissive. If the counties wish to take advantage of that, they can. And that was at least some relief, working with the constraints we had to provide additional funding to communities or to counties. But with that, I mean, there are a lot of things to talk about, but more importantly, I want to either see if I can answer your questions or at least get your feedback. The budget's not done yet. The transportation budget is, but the general fund budget is not. So we have an opportunity here, even though it's out of the House, to work with the Senate to get some of these issues addressed, and we will. But I'm more interested to hear what you have to say. So I'll turn it back to the chair.
Okay. Well, we thank you very much for that presentation and for the amount of time and effort you put into this. And I also think that that giving us the overall big picture and some of the major initiatives, along with the specific transportation-related items, is a very good combination, and we appreciate that. I'm going to ask a couple questions, and then I'm going to throw it open to the committee. The first question, it sounds to me like that the MCO issue is getting a great deal of attention, and that there is a decent prospect that something will develop that goes beyond what was produced in the as-in-produced version. Is there a fair basis for such optimism?
It is, and whether communities have robust transit authorities or transit opportunities is important, but the greater emphasis is that every representative represents a county or counties, and every county is impacted by this MCO issue. So it is on everybody. It's not as if this is only a select few that have this issue.
Absolutely.
All 99 members of the House are dealing with this, and all 33 members of the Senate as well. So it is clearly recognized as one of the major issues that we're working on.
Second question I have is regarding the permissive license tag fee. Do you know whether that money could be used for public transportation? Would that fit under the broad umbrella of infrastructure, or do you think it's more narrowly limited to roads and bridges?
I believe it's roads and bridges, and I did some analysis, and it appears there are about 400,000 vehicles registered in Cuyahoga County, so we're looking at about $2 million. But I believe it's restricted to roads and, actually, I know it is, because I had discussions about possibly looking at expanding it to a portion of it being used for transit. And the general consensus is that that roads and bridges would be the primary or the use for these funds.
Okay, thank you. Questions by my colleagues? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Greenspan, I'd like to hear at this point where we are with regards to the possible allocation of the Volkswagen settlement money for transit.
So that's an interesting discussion. So the state has yet to enter that class action lawsuit. So although there's been discussion about that money being appropriated, we did not include it in the budget because we have yet to join the class action lawsuit. So at this time, there's no appropriation for it because we effectively haven't put our name in the hat to be eligible for it. But there was discussion about that, and that's probably where you're gaining this information that there was discussion about adjoining those proceeds towards transit. So that's where we are right now. We've not adjoined the lawsuit, so the House didn't believe it would be appropriate to count on money that we definitively know we haven't.
To follow up on that, is there any reason why we wouldn't join the lawsuit and get the advantage of this settlement money?
Yeah, I'm not aware of there being a reason not to, and that we'd have to discuss that with the Attorney General's office to carry that discussion further.
Okay, well, it certainly bears watching. So I know there was a proposal at some point in the House in the transportation bill process that would have allocated something like 30 million of it for public transit. So that's a pretty significant number.
Well, and the thing to keep in mind is if let's assume that moves forward, that's effectively, it's one-time money.
Understood.
It's not sustainable. So, so the opportunities there, my thoughts on that, it would be used for more infrastructure and hard assets as opposed to operations to possibly backfill, whether it's equipment or more hard infrastructure.
For bus replacement.
Bus replacements. Right.
Yes, Mr. Singh.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative. Could you discuss at all, we have about an 11% cut in the transit line item for general revenue fund. It's going from 7.3 million to down about $800,000 to 6.5. Was that something that we didn't realize that we were even looking at a cut to that line item, and we were talking about retaining current funding levels. Is that something you could discuss at all?
Yeah, I'm not specifically aware of that line item in that level of detail, so I'll have to look into that before I comment on it. So, but I will make a note to look into that, and I'll respond back through the chair.
That would be an important area of advocacy for the remainder part of the budget process. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Dobain.
To Mr. Representative Greenspan, last meeting, Carol Caruso was here and provided a very interesting report. And in the report, they state that the transit issue is just not an urban issue, and it's also a rural. And as you were talking, because at the Planning Commission we do a lot of looking at communities, and a lot of times I even brought a map where there's food deserts. It's low income, you'll find people that don't own cars. In rural areas, there's also people that don't have jobs, that need to get to jobs. There also is the opiate crisis in the rural areas is very high also. And with this possible new change in healthcare, they were already far away from health centers, and they may be affected again. So I guess I'm just opining is how can Cuyahoga County, or just the counties in general, inform the legislature, that these issues permeate throughout the state, and that transit is important for economic development for every person in the state, and also for health, in the opioid rate.
No, and I appreciate that, and that's where, I talked about, earlier, the general perception of transit is it's an urban center mobility issue. And I'm trying to expand the discussion that is beyond that. It's to your point, it's healthcare, it's also economic development. When I was on the County Commissioners Association Board of Directors, and I use this example all the time, we had a rural county commissioner who talked just about that point on the economic development front. Yes, in Cuyahoga County and in your major cities, you have, although it might not be convenient, it might not be the way everybody wants it, but there is an opportunity to get on public transit and to be able to get to and from a job. It may take a while, it might be multiple stops, but you're right. You get to some of these rural counties. Number one, they have a transit system, but it's very limited. Extremely limited, or they have none at all. So one of the county commissioners brought up an example of a high school kid that he knows who just graduated from high school. His family lives in a rural environment. They're living at or above poverty, and they have one vehicle. And the parents need that car to get themselves to and from work. And now they've got this 18-year-old a high school graduate sitting at home wanting to work, but has no way to get to a job. And so that's an example that I keep using. And the more you're exposed to those types of situations, whether it's directly or indirectly, as I was through a discussion with a county commissioner, the more you're aware of the urgency for transit throughout the state. And we're not going to have an RTA in Knox County or in Van Wert County, but we need to provide a more robust opportunity to be able to move our population, whether it's for health reasons, medical reasons, or whether it's for economic development. And that's where my discussions have been trying to shift the focus. So to make it more local than just a distant urban core related issue. So it's through, if you've got members that live in a more urban area, it's letting them know that and they know that, that they've got these issues. But in those urban areas, they're dealing with other issues that are of greater importance or might be higher on their lists of items than transit may be in a more urban area. So it's driving home the issue, it's informing people, and it's advocating on behalf of what's important, and transforming the discussion from a Northeast Ohio issue to a statewide issue. Right. And so that's, we're in about our 168th day, so, or me in particular. So I'm trying to advocate, these issues.
Other questions?
That's mine already.
Okay. Well, we're very appreciative. Yes. Okay. We have a follow-up. Great.
Yeah, thank you. In the combating the opioid epidemic piece, the hopes piece, I'm seeing the $9 million that are hoped to be allocated to workforce, and I guess just to hopefully put a bow on it, just the urgency that we have here in Cuyahoga County. I'm sure both in terms of the opioid crisis as well as job access. In 2013, Brookings Institute has done a study that shows not just Cleveland, but all of Ohio's metro areas are far lagging behind the national average in terms of being able to connect people to new jobs by public transportation or transit in general around all of our metro areas. Right now, this $9 million to help with workforce, it's appreciated, from this, but really, that's about how much Columbus is going to be losing each year. With the MCO sales tax, we're going to be losing 19 up here and 10% service cuts. We had talked to Director Krause about how do we get to transit, to job centers in Westlake or Solon, where I grew up. At this point, it's tenuous. After this budget, we're talking about it being, I believe, not possible. With 10% service cuts, because we are already going to have a fare hike next year to $275. We don't have transfers at this point. So if you are taking that long trip out, you're talking about a $6 day pass. At this point, just really wanting to make sure, whether it's the treatment services provided at St. Vincent's Charity downtown, which a lot of people rely on transit to get to get into treatment, or getting to the jobs back out in the suburbs. This is okay, but if we have the cut with the MCO sales tax, it's not going to mean anything. But thank you for the attention on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And keep in mind, a lot of what we're seeing here, the details behind the delivery of these services and how these funds will specifically be used is still being worked out. But it was important, at least in the House, that we identify funds to deal with this issue directly. And we recognize that 170 million or the billion or so that's already being spent, at the state level, is not enough. And whether it's the $250 million that comes out of the Health and Human Service levy every year, even if all of that was put towards this issue, it's not enough. And so I believe what you're going to start to see is more encouraged collaboration for organizations to really work together, not get together once a quarter and talk about what we're doing, but I'm talking about collaboratively working together to address this issue. So the more we're able to do that, the more money we're able to put back into these issues, and it'll free up money for other areas. But like I said, I've been advocating on behalf and taking the different position on transit for health reasons, which this obviously would be one of them, and also for economic development purposes.
Okay. Anything else?
I just wanted to real quick, digressing off transit, but on budget-related items, there are a couple amendments that are in the current House budget that will help Cuyahoga County and help our communities. And if I could just share those with you quickly, and if you have this document, I could point out the ones. Like I said, not all of this is the memo I sent to the finance chair. Not all of these were put into the budget, but we'll start with under responsiveness to local partners. D, which is the Marks radio for municipalities. So right now, all of our municipalities are on the Marks radio system, and each municipality, well, including the county, pays $20 a month per radio. And the state, in the current budget, each radio receives a $10 credit. In the governor's as introduced budget, that credit was removed. So effectively, a community would be paying double for access to the Marks radio system. And I asked for an amendment to be placed in the budget. It was accepted, and it's $2 million a year. So our communities will continue to see the same level of service for the same price, not an increase in price. Item E, or early education funding for 3-year-olds, that amendment was accepted as well. In the current budget, in the 16-17 budget, in early childhood education funding, 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds were eligible for funding in 16, but only 4-year-olds in 17. And so what that resulted in 2017, it's estimated there are 3,000 empty, unfilled slots right now. There aren't enough 4-year-olds. And so, but 3-year-olds are now excluded. So they're under the current plan. This just changed the eligibility to include 3-year-olds. We didn't ask for more money. And so that was also accepted in the budget.
This came up at the Invest in Children annual meeting a couple days ago, and they were appreciative of that amendment.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. The next two items with Metro Health, those were not accepted. The opioid safety creation, that office, we believe we'll be able to incorporate that in the HOPES program. The special disease care unit, I'm not sure. I know what that is, obviously. Metro Health is the only hospital in the state that deals with infectious disease. So if we get a patient out of Cincinnati who has something, we're paying for it. And so this was to assist with that. That was not accepted. I put that back through in the omnibus. It was not accepted again. But I don't believe there's a general understanding that that item is not important. But I think as we're looking at the reduction in revenue to the state, that item might have been accepted in the past, wasn't now. Providence House, that amendment was accepted. So there's money going back to Providence House. The Cleveland Site Center was not. Moving down onto arts and culture. So I proposed an amendment to restore funding to libraries, primarily the 5 libraries in my district and Cleveland Public Library. Library funding by statutes 1.66% of the general fund. It was previously increased to 1.7 in this budget. It was the governor's budget. It was reduced back to 1.66. I proposed this amendment, but Rep. Yanowski proposed an amendment statewide to restore funding. That was not accepted. The travel and tourism, this was money that was in the budget, the last General Assembly. It was general fund money. What was introduced in the House and then was changed in the Senate last General Assembly was 2% of the beer and wine tax, no more than $1 million a year. It wasn't an increase in tax, just a reallocation of that tax. The Senate changed it and made it $1 million out of the general fund to work with primarily Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati to attract sports-related, travel-related activities, i.e. NCAA events, all-star games, things like that. Irish Town Bend, this
Was that amendment accepted?
was not.
No, okay.
It was not. Irish Town Bend, once again, a local Northeast Ohio issue, had to do with shoring up the bend. That was not accepted. The Western Reserve Historical Society and Cincinnati Museum funding, that was accepted. So those organizations will receive between the two of them $500,000 a year. The Front Festival here in Northeast Ohio was not accepted. So here's an interesting one. Moving down on O, increased autonomy for investments with county inactive monies. If we remember 2 years ago, and Representative then Baker, I'll still call you that, but was instrumental in helping get Metro Health's investment authority broadened so they can invest their funds more broadly. Cuyahoga County specifically asked that they have the same authority to do so. I submitted that amendment, got immediate resistance from the Ohio Treasurers Association, who did not want that broad of an authority. And so we scaled it back to be charter counties above $1 million, which is Cuyahoga only. But that amendment, unfortunately, was not accepted, but I know that it is being reintroduced in the Senate. The board of revision, the time for board of revision to address complaints. So I learned of this issue by serving on the board here, and Joe's Boatwright knows all about this. There's a certain finite time, 90 days from when a complaint is received to when a hearing is to be scheduled. Counties like Cuyahoga County, it gets between 15 and 18,000 complaints within a year. Just cannot get it done in that period of time. Thus, there are a lot of complaints that go on longer than this. What we did on this one, and some of these are all statewide. Statewide, and this was accepted. We broadened the timeline from 90 days to 90 business days for every county in the state. And for the 10 largest counties in population, they have an additional 90 business days to hear the complaints. This board of revision real property complaint notification, this one needs a lot of work. What happens, once again, on the board of boards of revision, what happens here is, and this is more commercial and industrial, you have as you know, school boards can file complaints against a property owner if they believe the property is paying less in taxes than it probably should. What has happened, and it's not frequently, but it's enough, is that on a commercial property, neither the buyer nor seller may be aware of a complaint that's been filed. The transaction takes place, the buyer now owns the property and then finds out that there's been a complaint filed, their property taxes go up, and now if they bought it for commercial purposes, they are not able to realize the maximum revenue potential they thought they were going to because now their taxes are higher. So this needs a lot of work. And and I plan on submitting it as a bill at a later date, but basically it will require notification prior to the transfer of property that if there's an outstanding complaint, that the buyer and seller would be notified. This last one, I talked to my aide this morning. We're going to be, on this page, we're going to be introducing this as a standalone bill. Cuyahoga County, as an example, is funding the Huntington Park Garage internally, saving money on bond costs and also interest by funding it internally. Certain cities, like Westlake, has bought Fairview Park's debt. Cities have the ability to buy other cities' debt, but it's only in the last 5 years. So what does that do? A city like Westlake or a county like Cuyahoga that could have this opportunity is only earning 1.5%, maybe. I don't. Councilman Miller is much more knowledgeable on the exact amount, but say it's 1% in interest income, and these communities are paying 2, 3, 4, 5% in interest expense. So what they currently have the ability to do is a city can loan another city money, say for 2%. They're earning more interest income. Instead of 1, they're earning 2. The other city is, instead of paying 4 or 5% interest expense, is only paying 2%. So it increases the loaning community's ability to earn more interest income, and it saves interest expense on debt on the community receiving the money.
In the last report, Cuyahoga County was earning 1.2%, and that was the highest we've seen in a little while. So this could be a win-win situation.
Right. And once again, this is a policy issue. It's not. I'm not asking the state for any money, but I believe this was lumped in and included in a number of issues like this, and I believe most of them were stricken. What I'm looking to do here is expand it from 5 years to 10 years. So right now, Cuyahoga County is planning on financing Huntington internally, but at 4.5 years, they're going to have to go back and refinance internally. This would say, okay, we can go 10. So that one I'm going to introduce as a standalone bill. Last two items. This is an interesting item. Sales tax on hotel intermediaries. So here's what's happening here. You buy a hotel room on hotels.com. You pay $100. You pay the sales tax. You know this issue. They pay the sales tax on $100. Hotels.com or Expedia or those providers are not remitting back to the taxing communities the full amount of tax. It's based off of, we're working on this. The state of Colorado 2 weeks ago, their Supreme Court ruled against the hotel intermediaries and for the local communities, and I believe it was $40 million in total that Expedia has to pay back to the state. The city of Denver in itself was $7.5 million, and that only went back 3 years. This practice has been going on since 2001. So it's a big issue, and we'll be addressing that later. This last one, transformational development tax credit. This is the Nucleus building, Nucleus project. They came to the state, and I proposed an amendment, which was not accepted at this time, which basically said any developer that invests $400 million or more in a project, this is statewide, they would be eligible to receive a $25 million tax credit. It's like the historical tax credit that we had. That's for existing buildings. This is for new construction. The caveat with that is the $400 million, at the minimum $400 million, none of that can be state money. So it's an entirely privately funded venture. As Representative Councilmember Baker knows, the issuance of tax credits is a touchy subject in Columbus. So we're going to continue to advocate for this, but that was not accepted as well.
Okay, well, thank you for the report, and thank you for the helpful amendments. I know the thing about the Board of Revision was particularly a serious problem because it was making us subject to litigation, and hopefully this will alleviate some of that. So we appreciate that. I do have to call your attention to one unfortunate piece of language that made it into the budget bill, which would restrict the ability of local governments to work on the lead-based paint problem through local housing initiatives, and that's a very, very serious problem in our area, and we need. There's no easy solutions. We need all the tools available. So I would appreciate your help in trying to get that removed from the budget bill sometime later in the process.
Well, and I know that that's an issue, and the representative who proposed the amendment has received some stark criticism from Toledo in particular over the same concept. What I can say about that is, at this point, it's currently in the House version, of the budget. If nothing else, what that has done is clearly elevated the issue of this lead-based issue to statewide attention. And so, although we deal with it once again in the urban areas, it's also an issue throughout the state. So, the discussion is being had as far as dealing with this issue at a more statewide level. So, it'll be interesting to see exactly how the Senate responds to this issue, because the concerns are now being raised after it left the House. So we'll monitor that closely.
We're gonna be sending a letter down on this issue shortly.
Okay.
We're gonna use the same process that the county council has used. It's not gonna be a resolution. It's gonna be a letter signed by several council members. Okay, thank you. Yes?
And I'm not familiar with that legislation until we started talking about it. So what is the state proposing? What's in that amendment? What is it that legislator wants to do?
Basically, it would require the state to effectively take the lead on dealing with the issue statewide.
Would they be proactive?
It's a very broadly written amendment at this point, so I don't know the specifics of what the ultimate intent is, but it would effectively take control of the issue to the state, as opposed to as it's being administered more locally.
Yeah.
I guess before we send a letter, I would like to know what exactly that proposal is and what it's suggesting. Is it a complete takeover of the inspections, or is it after the fact, or is it, I don't really know what the state legislation or amendment is, and would like to know the extent of what they are talking about, why it is they think there should even be a state takeover, and if there is a state takeover, are they usurping us, or are they, I don't really know. So I guess I would like to know that.
We'll see if we can get a hold of the exact language.
Right.
I would, just by way of history, I would point out that in the early 2000s, prior to the housing crisis, the state preempted local predatory lending laws and then did virtually nothing themselves, and there was local legislation that would have reduced the severity of the problem if it had been allowed to remain intact, but it was not allowed to, and the state preempted and then didn't do very much, and so that wasn't a good situation. Any other comments, Mr. Singh?
Just to comment on that specific piece, Mr. Chair, I believe that the language is that it would not allow for cities to conduct their own lead housing inspection programs.
If I may, so do we interpret that to mean that any inspection that is needed for any housing rental or sale would have to always be state inspected? Is it to that level of?
I wasn't sure if the language indicated that counties could, but it would, as the chair says, preempt specific city government, so City of Akron, City of Cleveland, from programs that they already have ongoing.
I guess that's a pretty important distinction as to if we're not going to do it, who are they going to do it? And if, I mean, that's what it's about here. And then if they are going to take over, what does that look like? And as the chair has stated, they don't have a great history of taking over local government initiatives, but, that's the question. Are they going to take over the inspections? Or are they going to oversee what we do? Or what is it that this proposal is actually asking for?
We'll try to get more information.
Thank you.
Anything else for the distinguished representative? Okay, well, we're greatly appreciative of the work that you're doing. It's obvious from your presentation that you've, and this is no surprise from the way that you worked as a county council person, that you have not dealt with this at the 30,000-foot level. You've gotten into the weeds and paid attention to detail on our behalf, and we're very appreciative of that, and wish you continued success. And we hope to bring you back either to this committee or the committee of the whole when the whole thing is done, and get the final report so that we can factor that into the 2018 to 2019 biennial budget process. By the way, on Monday, which is the 15th, right on schedule, a month and a half after the end of the quarter, we're going to do the first quarter review, and we got the first quarter report. It was submitted to us yesterday, so council members have from Wednesday to Monday to review the report. That's a luxury we often haven't had in the past, so that's a real step forward. Actually, Ms. Keenan at Budget and Management has been doing very good work in producing these reports in a timely fashion, and it's been very helpful. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, that'll conclude the update on the House-passed version of the operating budget. Okay, I would now like to shift gears a little bit and call your attention to this one-page document that everybody should have on your desk, titled Transportation Committee Briefing Document Outline. And what this outline actually is that the county executive has asked us for a briefing on the work of this Transportation Advisory Committee, and that meeting is going to take place next week on the 16th, and this is an outline that was prepared, and it kind of covers what some of the topics are that this committee either has covered or is likely to cover, and also in the final section it provides an outline of what the final report of this committee might look like, at least in terms of the topics covered in that report. And so I just wanted to kind of use this document to stimulate our thinking and just to have a little bit of open discussion as to what kind of things the committee might focus on in the last 6 months of our existence. And I think during that time we're going to be doing a little less on intergovernmental advocacy, which we've done a lot on so far, and probably a little bit more on the local side of things. And so to start off our discussion, I would just like to throw something out to Mr. Mitterholzer or rather better to Mr. Feliciano at RTA, that one of the things that came out of the transit center was that they said that in some cities what they're doing is saying, well, what really drives ridership is when you have a small group of high frequency routes where the buses come every 5 or 10 minutes and the high frequency routes are connected to each other in a grid, and they're connected to the rail system, and maybe have more frequency on those routes to get them up to the high level frequency that's really attractive to riders, and then maybe less frequency on some of the other routes. And so I would like if you could go back to RTA between now and the next meeting and just get us some information as to whether RTA has done any looking at that kind of concept in the past, and if there's been any looking at that kind of concept, whether you've come to the conclusion that that's something that might apply to the greater Cleveland RTA, or whether you think that's something that that may work in other cities but doesn't apply to our situation. So we just want to kind of get a current status on that particular concept, if you could help us with that.
Thank you with the task, Mr. Chair. While we're on the topic of frequency and system design, as a result of the transit center visit, they actually invited us to have somebody from our staff come and attend a workshop about system redesign. So we are going to have a member of staff in July go to New York to a presentation that Transit Center is having with people who are in various stages of the system redesign. So while I cannot publicly state that we are currently exploring that, it is something that we are going to have a member of staff, attending, and then hopefully they'll be bringing back some best demonstrated practices, and then we can, look at things from there. I know that the last time that we did a system redesign was back in 1995.
Well, I really appreciate that report, and we like when specific action things take place as a result of what's going on in this committee. So that's a good thing. So thank you for that.
Sure.
So I just open the floor, and Miss Baker, feel free to chime in. You can participate as well, and you don't even need to go through the chair. Let's see if we can just have some open discussion and see what people have to say.
Mr. Chair, may I follow up to your previous comment as well? Thank you. In addition to the frequency, I do think that while it is not a solution in terms of the increase in the frequency, I do think the fact that now that we have made the real-time data available and that there are developers picking it up, and there's also the opportunity for those that want to develop technology to better get that information out to the riders, it is going to help, at least to help notify people that we can actually determine when the vehicle will arrive, as opposed to before, when it was just pulling from the published time points instead of the actual GPS or, well, the GTFS link. So I think that is going to help people feel at least more comfortable with trying to use the service.
I agree. That's one of the things that the Transit Center pointed out that people like. It gives them at least a little more feeling of control over what their wait time is going to be. So yeah, that's very positive as well.
Is there, through the chair, is there a cost in regards to Mr. Feliciano, in regards to the redesign? Is there a cost that RTA has in things that they've looked at in the past? Is there a number to that?
Councilwoman, Chair to Councilwoman Conwell. Regarding your question specific to the cost, I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with what that cost would be. I can research that and get back to you.
So they haven't done a study already to have some kind of data available?
Not that I'm aware. Like I said, the last time we did a system redesign was 1995.
I would add that there would be two aspects to this. There would be the cost of the redesign process itself, which is some, hopefully not a huge amount in the grand scheme of things. Then there's the cost of implementing the recommendations themselves, and it could be done revenue neutral if you increase service in some areas and decrease service in other areas so that it balances out, you know, but it could be there could be costs if you increase services in a lot of areas but don't decrease services in many areas, and hopefully you could get a dynamic effect. I mean, if you increase services in some areas and you decrease service in other areas, but the areas where you increase service makes those routes very attractive and you get a substantial increase in ridership, well, that could move the revenue on your revenue picture, and that's probably what you want.
Mr. Chair, so just for context, I know, so Columbus has just began this process pretty much this past week. The system redesign really relies on using, rather than, and we saw a map, I believe, of the priority corridor routes that RTA currently has that pretty much run on a lot of the major streets, Lorain, Detroit, and then Euclid on the east side, St. Clair, Superior. It really relies on using less like hub and spoke systems, where a rider will take, say, you're going, from the west side down to even Brooklyn, right? So you have to come in very much to the center of the city, then come back down. The system redesign very much relies on a high frequency network of shorter trips that catch connections. So you have a more kind of district-based bus route that then will connect to, say, the Red Line or another bus going, to your destination. So maybe you'll catch 3 buses instead of 2, but you'll actually quicken up your pace because your transfers. Currently, we don't yet have transfers apart from if you do have your day pass or it's the 10 ride. The 5 trip. Right now, with the fare hike, it's, we are seeing that Cleveland's RTA is going to be without transfers for its city of our size and our income levels, the highest costing transit in the country, which is certainly distressing. I think one of the hopes that we have as both the city and county are supporting major financial deals to to invest in our current sports stadiums, that one of the pieces, as we know, all of the sports stadiums rely heavily on transit, that we ask them to meaningfully contribute to keeping the fares down going forward, because we certainly know that a lot of folks can't afford to get to work or on the current system, and with fares going up, that's going to be an increasing challenge. Also, when we're dealing with a policy climate that puts as much as 10% cuts over our head, this is something that people are really trying to figure out now if they can rely on transit for their jobs going into the future at all. Where we have a few routes, the Cleveland State Line, the Health Line, that we know we can count on, where even the Red Line is reaching a point of being functionally obsolete by 2025 without significant investments. Where 10% of the track is already under go-slow order between 65th and 25th. I just really, for the sake of what we have to present to the executive, give a sense of the urgency and kind of the needs that we need for private sector to be chipping in, making sure, because even right now, this fare hike is potentially going to be revenue negative, just based on how many people are going to say, I can't afford this bus fare anymore. We saw 2% cuts and fare hikes last year. We saw an 8% reduction in ridership, which would indicate that I imagine there's a bit of a combination factor between the fare hikes and the service cuts that leads to that 8%. Next year, we'll see how much fare hikes do alone. But, to be able to get to that point of talking about maximizing ridership, it's still going to take a lot more for that redesign to be meaningful.
Does somebody know how long it's been that we haven't had transfers? I don't think it's always been this way. Does
The
someone?
last cut, what's the last cut?
Mr. Chair, I believe that was the 2009 cuts in the recession. We lost a fair amount of service, almost about 40% service during the recession. A lot of major bus routes, the 12, others that were cut. Certainly the neighborhoods that depended on those were, using those for economic development, using those for workforce, access, people getting to work, people getting to school, people getting to healthcare. But I believe that the transfers were removed in 2009, but ask Mr. Feliciano for confirmation on that.
So is it right that right now there's no transfers on any bus rides, that if you go from one bus to another, or if you go from the bus to the train?
There's a couple exceptions. So the day pass gets you, meaning if you, any of the day, week,
I'm not
month,
counting the day pass.
then the 5 ride pass, if you buy, which isn't on sale it's on sale in a limited amount of locations. So getting a 5 ride is a potential solution to that, but it is not as quickly available as so you typically have access to your single fare and your day pass at the ticket machine or when you're getting on the bus.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
It's interesting for your system redesign. That's been since 1995. And so that's over 20 years since you've looked at it. Wow. In that period of time, the motoring public, I'm sure their habits perhaps may have changed. So will that be taken into consideration perhaps of those that are independently driving, shifting perhaps to public transit because of the convenience, perhaps better stops, whatever it is that perhaps you'll be looking at in order to encourage more ridership? Is that a reasonable initiative that you would hope to find in your system redesign, that perhaps the newer workers that 20 years ago would have automatically gotten in their car and gone to work, that now that they perhaps, if offered and was reasonable for them to transport themselves, would consider public transportation?
Councilwoman Baker, thank you for your question. Only speculating here, I think that makes sense. Going back to the transit center presentation and what Mr. Singh was saying, is that I think when you look at, hopefully, if we were to do a system redesign, that it would allow us to be more radial, and you could build in those linkages, because realistically, having downtown Cleveland be the hub doesn't make sense in terms of workforce development where the job centers are. And you definitely have to take that in consideration, especially if you're trying to look at frequency. But going back to what the chair said, we would love to increase frequency, but I know the reality is that unfortunately, because of the balkanization of the suburbs that happen here, in addition to where the workforce centers are, that we have to balance frequency and span of service. And that's very hard to do. You can't do both. You kind of have to pick one or the other. I don't know how you balance that.
May I ask?
Yes.
And is that based on the motoring public, those that are now in their car, buying their insurance, crossing the highways, coming to work? Is that because perhaps you'll find that they still would rather do it that way? Or is there some, over the last 20 years, of movement that if there was access and ease of going from point A to point B, that could be something that could be changed?
Councilwoman Baker, I think yes. I mean, people definitely will adopt different habits when it comes to transportation. If the ease is there, but if there's some people that from a frequency standpoint, if it's not going to be convenient with their lifestyle, they're not going to choose to rely on transit. That's asking too much of a sea change for them. I think a lot of it is more about how we, in terms of the consumer and the public, look at public transportation and what needs that it provides for us. And there's still a lot of people who could be choice riders, and they vote with their wallets, and they choose to drive. I think that the larger question is we have to do more for our captive riders because this is an equity issue, and those people deserve more.
If I may, just one more time. The cost of owning a vehicle, the cost of insurance, the cost of parking, I would think that there could be a case made if there was access from point A to point B to really overcome what many are paying for. It's perhaps the independence of being able to leave when you want, come when you want, is the challenge. I mean, is that all? I guess I'm just asking, is that going to be part of your system redesign to take a look at increased ridership based on perhaps cultural changes since the last 20 years?
Councilman Baker, merely speculating here. I mean, I think that those things would definitely have to be taken into consideration. I think the challenge for us, though, in the current system configuration is that if we were trying to provide these higher frequency routes that would provide the linkages to where the jobs are, the question is, well, where do we remove service? Yeah. People don't like to have to make those tough decisions. We don't want to have to make those decisions. But for instance, like a lot of people continue to be upset about the Green Line cutting off at 9 o'clock. I ride the Green Line myself. I personally don't like that. But at the same point, there are people who their sole means of transportation is still an option. And these people who have other options and they refuse to go park at the Blue Line, I want to be empathetic to them, and I understand that they don't want to make that change, but I feel like they don't understand that there are other people who have no other means.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
We have serious constraints that we have. We've built our job fields. So we have it out in Solon and Independence and Brecksville and Westlake, and this makes it a challenge to get to all these places. One of the things that the Transit Center was recommending is that we have to think about the transit system when we talk about where we locate development, and that if we can develop a concentration of residents and jobs and retail in and near the rail stations, that could attract a lot of ridership. I mean, right now we have these huge park and ride lots, but what this means is that almost nobody lives close enough to walk to transit. The frequency and how fast the bus gets there and whether you can walk to your transit stop are the three biggest things that drive ridership. So we have challenges just in the way that our community has been built. And so that's why some of these local questions of how you do the zoning and how you do the parking and where you locate development and things like that, these local things can be done in ways that make the transit system work better, or they can be done in ways that make it work worse. And we haven't paid much attention to that in the last 30 or 50 years, and I think that's led to it being done in ways that make the transit system work worse. Yes.
You also have to factor in the population loss as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think to that point, Mr. Chair, one of the things we really have to make sure is that when we are putting our money into development, that there is a very real consideration of public transit's access to those investment sites, whether you're talking about a downtown entertainment hub, whether you're talking about, for example, the Opportunity Corridor, where the state counted, transit assets as part of the Opportunity Corridor, and at the same, as a justification for why it should be done, and at the same time, you have stations there that are being really neglected. East 79th Street Station for the Red Line I don't know if you've ridden there, but it's not a very pleasant stop getting from it. And that was within the study area, and that county had put in part of that money. We have NOAC having contributed some of that money, and that's where we really need that kind of attention. I'm still hopeful that the East 105th stop is going to get the money to allow all board on board. Yeah, so that's a small but a good benefit. But when we're talking about being able to have ADA accessible, contemporary transit system, stops, that money is being put in. They're talking about $330 million for a neighborhood that is largely transit dependent, and we have not, in planning those kind of projects, made sure that the investments in transit are commensurate to the community need.
Ms. Cobain?
Yes, Councilman Miller, I just wanted to relay and maybe volunteer the County Planning Commission. County Planning Commission in the last 3-4 years has done about 15 master plans in communities in Cuyahoga County. We're going to be doing another 4, Mayfield Village, Strongsville, Brecksville, and I can't remember. However, in every one of these master plans, we are the planners are sitting down and talking about these issues in these suburban communities, how to make it easier for them to get around, for them to acknowledge that transit is an important factor in people that are living there now and that will be moving. A lot of millennials are now shifting gears and maybe buying houses. They still want to do transit. So that is a core piece of what part of our master plans are, and in terms of also in the economic development of these communities. So I would be happy, and Marionette can possibly, we'd have we'll volunteer our director, Glenn Coyne, to possibly talk about those issues, and that it's not being, we're working with RTA. A lot of it too is the bike pedestrian nature. How do you get from your house to the bus stop? Right. You making it more pedestrian friendly, or the bus, you're allowed to bring your bike on the bus, but are you able to get, ride your bike up there? So there's a lot of different issues, and we're trying to tackle that for those communities. So I think it would be maybe a good conversation. If I could just continue in terms of just one other item maybe for discussion with the county executive is, I think the presentation by Carol Crusoe on the getting the
Yeah.
business community is very, very important, I think. I know the county executive has been building in the economic development department, the workforce initiative, and the Ohio means the county city workforce. And I think it's very important that the business community, they can move and they can spend the money, but they have to be a part of the solution in getting people to work and, and their livelihoods. I think that's an important part. And I think in Carol's report, and I think the business community is starting to get a sense that it is time for them to participate. And I think that would be a great part for the county to play.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to piggyback on what Claire was saying. At NOACA, we did just finish up a regional transit-oriented development study, and we looked at the 5 counties, and including the city of Cleveland, assigned typologies and what stations are primed for development right now, and Claire was part of that study. So we have that available now that's on our website, and we're starting to move over the summer to try to involve the business community to try to locate housing and workforce, retail, and other type of things closer to transit stations so that we can try to help and boost up the ridership for RTA and surrounding suburban counties.
Well, I'm glad to hear that was done. I would encourage everybody to go on NOACA's website and
Yes, I was a project manager, so if you have any questions about it, you can contact me.
I would encourage everybody to go check that out. That sounds useful.
Mr. Chair, do you think that we could invite Kelly to present on that?
Yes, that sounds like a great idea.
Well, thank you.
Would you for our next meeting? We would.
Sure, no problem.
We would like you to present on that.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just sitting back listening to everybody, I guess we're all kind of collectively in agreement. But I guess when you talk to the executive, my stance has always been this has been a great conversational committee to bring out the issue on the forefront, but of course we don't have some of the many players that need to be present in making some of these decisions or determining if they're going to lead in that direction. So 3 points. One, first, collectively, all partners agree on how we should fund Cuyahoga County Transportation. I think we're on different pages, and when I think this group and this committee is collectively looking at it. But when we talk about our business and our hospitalization and our county exec and our mayors, we need other partners that are putting this as a priority and setting up a meeting to what is that conversation going to lead to. So if we can collectively agree, we've done a lot of the back work on the current funding strategy, or are we willing to add funding? I think when we heard from the many public meetings and the individuals, the residents that were using the system, they just thought it was a county issue and they just wanted us to fix it, put that money in. So I think we're on a disarray on that because we get federal funding, state, and we need to collectively talk. Does that look like us figuring out a solution to add up that shortfall and what that would look like? But first we have to collectively agree that this is even something that the county wants to even endeavor. So that's the first step. Then redesign. So once you can get all the partners on there collectively agreeing that this is going to be a focus, we're going to solve it in the next year or two in Cuyahoga County. Then the redesign. RTA could be working on, or NOACA and the county planning could really be working on the redesign of the system to better cover Cuyahoga County. What would that look like? So once we collectively agree and once we know what it looks like, then we can really have the fundamental conversations of how we pay it. and then decide how that would be paid amongst the three partners if, we agree that Cuyahoga County will be a player in that, federal, state, and local collectively. But with the caveat that the federal and state governments cannot, they have to commit to that funding that they've previously done and not, once we take something on our shoulders, think they can pull it away. So that's how I look at it overall.
Okay, great. Other comments? Okay, well, that gets us started. We have some sense of direction for some things to continue working on. Specifically at the next meeting, we're going to hear from Kelly Britt about the transit-oriented development study, and then we're gonna hear from Jose some more about the about system redesign, and we'll take it from there.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I forgot to have one other NOACA announcement.
Yeah.
Today, as we were here, that's why Ms. Gallucci can't be here today. We have released a trip planning tool called Go Ohio Commute. And so it is so that you can figure out how to get to where you need to get, either carpool, alone, transit, walking, or biking. That tool is available right now. It's goohiocommute.com. So everyone check it out and see if it really helps you get to your destination, and let us know.
Okay, ohiocommute.com.
Go Ohio Commute.
What?
GoOhioCommute.com.
Go Ohio?
Yes. Yeah, it's like Go HIO, so it's not, yeah. It's 1-0. It's 1-0, yeah.
Go HIO commute.
Ohio.
GOhiocommute.com.
Yes.
Okay, check that out, folks. That sounds like fun. Okay, so that we are now up to miscellaneous business. We've been doing a little bit of that as we go along, but if there's any other miscellaneous business. Has anybody signed in for public comment unrelated to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair.
Well, in that case, the next item is a motion to adjourn. Do we have one?
Second.
Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Keep going around.
We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Is that what they're supposed to do? Go